Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Todd Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy, and I'll be your host. It's great to see everyone again. Happy New Year. I know last year was a rough one. I'll stay on after the meeting to chat with anyone who'd like about how you're feeling and any other topics that come up today, strategy, anything. But today we're here to talk about the future and a plan for success. So in our program today, we'll be focusing both on the immediate goal of getting the climate parts of Build Back Better done, $550 billion in exciting investments to ignite our clean transition. The Climate Action Campaign and EDF will be here at 1 p.m. to explain the 7-week full court press on Congress now through the State of the Union. Before that, we'll open the meeting by talking big picture and the idea of filing a flagship climate bill. We'll do a deep dive on the Earth Bill and the strategy it supports. And we'll also discuss the Off Fossil Fuels Act and refiling that. The mood is right for this conversation, and there's a lot of interest from all groups across the movement. We'll also have the Poor People's Campaign to update us on voting rights and building cross-movement unity with a big event in June. And the Center for International Environmental Law is going to tell us about a new international plastics treaty in the works coming up in February at the United Nations Environmental Assembly. So there will always be a lot going on in the climate policy world. This year, 2022, I'm going to focus on the Earth Bill and getting a flagship bill filed. And I'm going to start us off today talking about why and hopefully convincing you all to take that idea and run with it to help manifest this emergency dream, this Hail Mary really at the 11th hour. Before I jump in there, I just want to say a bit about the climate movement and where we are after 2021, structurally and politically. The climate movement is growing and mobilizing in many ways. There are a variety of coalitions that are in full action. To list a few that we worked with this year, there's the Climate Action Coalition, which is the big groups and League of Conservation Voters, Climate Power. There's the 100% Clean Energy Coalition, which is led by Evergreen and CCAN, Chesapeake Climate Action Network. There's Build Back Fossil Free, which Center for Biological Diversity and Indigenous groups are coordinating. They did the People v. Fossil Fuels in DC action. There's an ad hoc lobby group that meets and discusses the daily actions in Congress and the administration. There's the Break Free from Plastics Coalition, which is exceptionally well run, and you'll hear more about that today. There's the U.S. Climate Action Network, which has a strong social justice focus. And of course, our network, the Earth Bill Network, which is growing fast with over 300 activists and 50 groups. And where our core mission is really to connect the inside action to the grassroots so we can build collective power. There are a variety of demands in play throughout these various coalitions. The BBBA, $550 billion, obviously is top of order for most groups. There's a powerful call for the president to declare a climate emergency. And there are many different bills on various fronts you can see in our bill package. There's also a big focus now on the EPA and how infrastructure money rolls out. And the Supreme Court will be hearing a case soon on the EPA's power under the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gases. Word is, we may lose there. So this all cues up the next phase and calls the question on having federal legislation to ban greenhouse gases. This seems virtually inevitable as our only hope of stopping our pollution on a timeline. Briefly on the international front, we're focused on the Fossil Fuels Non-Proliferation Treaty. The next step there, I think, is to put some meat on the bones of what such a treaty would look like. A group that's expert in this, I spoke with the other day, is now working up a paper on options and how we can go about banning CO2 like we did hydrofluorocarbons via various paths. Meanwhile, the COP was disappointing, and the United Nations is still moving at a snail's pace to put out a fire. We need to be talking about other options on that front, new options on the international level, as the United Nations was really never designed to work fast, and the current plan there is not working on the timeline we need. So ultimately, a treaty, it gets real when you pass a national law to implement it. So this too ends up back at the conversation of federal legislation in the United States to ban greenhouse gases. So big picture, the climate arena is building, mobilizing, and all eyes will stay on Congress. And all of that's very good. And we've come a long way on that front. Politically, however, we now see clearly where the Democratic Party is on policy in Congress. The focus is on incentives and funding. Mandates are not on the table. outlawing pollution is not on the table. CO2 is not on the table. But after this year, we have pretty good clarity. And that's very important. We have clarity on the effectiveness of a one-party strategy and its limitations, both in terms of policy and politics. This is critical in terms of charting our path forward. But so while we push for every win on the table now, and we're going to fight that, you're going to hear about it more, it's clear that we have to have a new plan that is based on winning no matter which party is in charge of Congress. I used to tell the gay rights movement, you can't have a one-party movement and a two-party system. So we too need a plan to win in a two-party system, as hard as that sounds. So generally, it's important to remember that civil society is the fourth pillar of government, and it needs to be separate to play its important role of pressuring the government to do more, go bigger, act faster, to make change. And we cannot change the status quo if we are working within it exclusively. So this is our charge now going forward, to change what's politically possible by driving our own agenda from the people for the planet. Fortunately, public support for action in Congress is huge. The solutions are working and cheaper. Terrible storms are driving panic and passion, and activists are annoyed, which is all good motivation. Basically, we're in great shape for the next phase, which is all about unification and focus. So this leads me to the Earth Bill. And I'm going to rush through my presentation because we have Rania, who helped get the OFF Act done, queued up next, and she has to leave by 12:30. So I'm going to run this a little bit faster than I might otherwise, and Greg's going to cut me off if we are up against the clock there, and we need to, and then I'll just continue my remarks afterwards. So basically, I'm going to use the presentation because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm personally going full force into this, talking about it in all the various coalitions I mentioned, and reaching out to all individual leaders. And so my hope is that with this presentation, that it will inspire you to take the idea and really talk it up and run with it, because the Earth Bill is not really just a bill. It's a strategy, really, to build a movement powerful enough to save our future. So here's the Earth Bill, a moonshot for Earth. I'm going to start briefly by talking about the budget, carbon budget. You all know, 1.5, 7 years, 5 months before our pollution locks us into 1.5, 25 years before we're locked into 2. The destruction has begun. The tipping point reports are terrible about what happens at 2 degrees warming now. And the UN trajectory is based on current pledges, 2.7. So we need to act like we're in a crisis. We have a pollution crisis, and it's time for a full court press to stop our pollution nationwide and globally. So we're presenting today the Earth Bill. It's a 2030 moonshot for Earth. It would require 100% by 2030 in 3 areas: renewable energy, electric vehicles, and regenerative agriculture. It's electricity, cars, and food. So this is where the policy meets the people. It's 80% of the pollution solution and 100% of the political solution, because this is where all the corporate opposition is. I like to think of it as the people telling the government to make the corporations produce with clean inputs instead of polluting inputs. And I think it grounds it to realize that it's our pollution. It's our money that is paying the electric bill and the food bill and the gas bill. And it's our responsibility to stop it. Fortunately, 70% of the public support this idea. Let's see if I can move. The federal government, so 70% of the public supports the federal government regulating the release of greenhouse gases from sources like power plants, cars, and factories in an effort to reduce global warming. That's a recent Washington Post ABC poll. You just need a name to give the public something to, encapsulate that idea, that passion. And mandates are absolutely necessary. This is from the World Resource Institute, one of the authoritative voices on strategy and policy. The US will need to set an industry-specific greenhouse gas caps to hit Biden's commitment under the Paris Agreement. Those would include vehicle emission standards, mandates for low and zero emission electricity, and requirements on buildings and fuel. So we have to be ready to say the word mandates, pollution mandates, Again, it's our money that pay these companies. We are entitled to tell them how to do it. This is from the Policy Digest, which you're all familiar with, where we digested over 170 documents into 700 solutions. You can see that these three ideas, energy, renewable energy, regenerative agriculture, and electric vehicles, have broad-based support across a whole slew of reports, documents. So we're in the solid ground here, and there is coalition alignment on all of this. VICA from US-Can, a great policy document. The OFF Act had these, and you'll hear more about that. EDF, which is the core of the climate action campaign, and their letter has all these requirements. The Thrive bill had these ideas, and these would tackle a huge percentage of the situation. Some of our memes on it: the Earth Bill, our pollution solution. So this is a core political showdown, and no one disagrees with these solutions. We're just reluctant due to the politics. And they're all tied up in one fight at the core of democracy. Who controls Congress and our pollution policy? Do the people control that, or do the corporations control that? And it's time to call this question for the children. And this is our choice. And I want to emphasize that we have choices today that will not be available to our children. So while we're hemming and hawing over details and the niceties of this thing versus that thing, we're really wasting the opportunity that we have. And again, it's our pollution, our duty. This broke my heart this summer. So that literally broke my heart. I don't know how to stop it. So this is what we're doing it for, the children. And this is me getting arrested for the New York bills. We had 3 big arrest moments for the New York climate bill. There will be many more before we're getting the Earth bill passed. So the status is the network is strong and growing. We have 300 activists nationwide who have signed up, over 50 groups. The adopted district you're going to hear more about has a lot going on. We have many solid teams that have been working and having meetings, and the bill package is building legislative unity. There are lots of interest in other coalitions that we're involved in. The OFF Act is in play. Earth Day is excited about it, and Drawdown New York City is hosting a whole forum on the Earth bill next month. And let's see, I can't move anything here. There we go. So the Earth bill plan generally is that by this year, we're going to build movement unity and get the bill filed, grow public awareness, use it as a political litmus test, and elect supporters. Then in the next 2 years, 23 to 24, we'll be counting our votes after the election, focus on other key districts, build coalition cohesion and public demand. And by 2025, we should be queued up at least to force a vote and through a bipartisan support, no matter who is in charge. This is normally, it would be a pipe dream, but it's not, I don't believe. We have massive capacity in this movement, waiting mobilization, thousands of groups. The passion and desperation is ever growing. Technology and the pricing of the alternatives is all great, which is a huge force. The storms are forcing a recognition, and obvious solutions are already in motion. These are all very good places from which to work. The firewall, of course, is real. Big oil still setting the agenda. Mandates aren't on the table. One party can't carry big solutions alone. Resistance is in both parties, and we have to manage a smooth transition, which is both hard and necessary. So I don't know how much time we have left.
You have a couple of minutes.
Okay, I'm going to dart through this, and then we'll come back to it and dig in a little after. The next steps are publicity, community, and Congress. Publicity, we're going to be doing grassroots publicity online, influencer campaigns. I'm reaching out to friends and community leaders, and we're going to have looks like things are shaping up for a spring at the farmers markets all over the country, and we're talking to the National Association of Farmers Markets. And the idea would be we go to those in force, and we're going to pitch the carbon clock as the urgency and the Earth bill as the solution. Of course, we have all sorts of tools. Here's an example of some of the memes from an influencer dancer, Sebastian Zamora. Here's another one, playfully on Captain Planet. here's something more calm if that's what you want to use. And the second prong is community. We have a lot of support so far, but we need to build much more. This is a window of some of the meetings I'm in and the various coalitions I mentioned. There's not a lot of overlap. So there's just a huge number of groups and organizations out there that we can contact. So everyone needs to reach out to every group you know, and then Congress, of course. So we urge you to adopt a district and ask the elected officials and candidates to support the Earth Bill, and then to contact the local political clubs about this. We're going to go, as I say, into a two-party plan. Here are some of the Republicans that are in districts that have had particularly bad weather events. So we feel that these are fertile grounds for organizing. And you'll hear later from Jane, who's in Louisiana, about the passion down there. So
Todd, it's 12:20.
That's 12:20. So I'm going to stop and I'll dig into these later. But the bottom line, reasons for the Earth Bill, top line is that these are consensus solutions. We're going to be telling the truth to our children and honestly be able to say we're working on a plan to save their future. We're going to use it as a political litmus test. We're going to build political power, and it's a solution that the public can really understand. So we welcome everybody to the Earth Bill Network. And with that, I'll stop screen sharing and welcome Rania, Batrice to the conversation. Rania led the organizing around, with many others, I guess, around the Off Fossil Fuels Act, which in 2018 was our mission. This team has evolved over time, but that was our mission. And it's an incredible bill, and it has wonderful provisions. And we've been talking, and she's excited about revisiting the bill, lifting it back up. And so I'm thrilled about that because it had like 400 supporters behind it and a whole process that went into it. And so we'll see how these two roads converge or parallel, it doesn't matter. But now welcome, Rania. Thank you for everything you do. I'm so grateful that you're here. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Todd. And thanks everybody for being here today. And I apologize, I have to run to another meeting shortly, but this is so important. I wanted to make sure I made some time here. And just quickly to kind of talk about the origin story of the OFF Act. One of the things I talked to Todd about was how beautiful the process actually was, even though it was really rushed. It was very, very rushed. We had to get it done pretty quickly, but we really were able to bring such incredible organizations to the table who usually maybe would not have, they weren't like sort of the big massive orgs that maybe always get asked for their input. They were smaller orgs doing really important work, but didn't have as massive of a footprint as some of the others. So we're very, very proud of the work that we did on this bill in drafting it and getting, as Todd mentioned, out the gate. We had 400 organizations from across the country that were supportive coming out of the gate. At the time, it was the most aggressive and progressive climate justice bill in Congress. And we really made an effort to center climate justice, which hasn't always, as we know, has not always been done. So really just, it was an incredible process. I've done this work in March, it'll be 22 years, and I can honestly say this maybe was the most collaborative effort I've ever gotten to be a part of. So just a little table setting there for us. I do want to go through what some of the provisions in the OFF Act were/are, and then talk about just a couple. We have some work we can do to make it even better. And full disclosure, my husband worked on this with me as well, and he has offered to help us. He has all the notes and things because we had talked about what were some of the things that we would want to make stronger and more specific. So we've got some of that in the works already too. But I'm just going to dive in just real quick on some of those provisions that were included in the original OFF Act. So providing a just transition with a focus on environmental and economic justice, providing a roadmap for 100% of electricity sold in the United States to come from clean energy. Our date was by 2035, because that is sort of where the science was at the time. Of course, we've got updates now, so we might seriously consider 2030. We can talk about that later. And then it also had an interim benchmark of 80% by 2027, requiring 100% of car sales from manufacturers to be zero emission vehicles, again, by 2035. I'm just going to say that number, but understand we can discuss if that makes sense later. Ending federal fossil fuels subsidies. I just feel like I want to shout that from the rooftops, y'all. And putting a moratorium on new major fossil fuel projects. Placing a tax on offshore corporate income to help fund the renewable energy revolution, requiring the elimination of fossil fuels without allowing for interim marketplace avoidance mechanisms like our favorite cap and trade that have proven ineffective and significantly reducing emissions. That was a kind of a big deal because if y'all remember the 2050 bill, and I'm not here to disparage anybody else's work, but there was some of that cap and trade language in that 2050 bill. So we were very, very specific in making sure it was very clear that is not a reasonable solution if we're talking about real action. We talked about the OFF Act, stopping fossil fuel projects, creating tens of thousands of new jobs while transforming our energy economy, beginning to address environmental injustice, and putting us on a path towards the national mobilization necessary to address the climate crisis. This part in particular, because I think we've all probably been a part of conversations where labor and jobs and all of those conversations, they're hugely important. None of us want to see people losing their jobs, right? We probably can all agree on that. But I feel like we have even more information now than we even did then, especially around things like capping and orphan wells. And there are literally millions of these things across the country that need to be addressed. And those are not, that's not new training for new jobs. These are people who are doing these pipeline jobs now can easily move into addressing the orphan well situation and capping old wells and leaks and things like that. So it's not some etherical, thing that wouldn't it be nice? No, it's actually really possible. So sorry, I get really excited about that part too. And then we just really leaned into this actually us being in a climate emergency, even more so now than then. I mean, we know more now than we did in 2018 when we first drafted the OFF Act. And it is an existential threat to people and to the planet. And we know, I was telling Todd the other day, I feel like so often we get lost in the doom and gloom of what we're facing. And that's real. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. We all see, the Tornado Alley is not where it used to be. I'm in Texas. We have earthquakes in Texas where there are no fault lines or there were no fault lines. And we saw what happened in Kentucky, tornadoes in December. That's not a usual thing. So all these things that we're faced with it almost daily. We can't pretend like it doesn't exist, but all hope is not lost. We still have a chance to do something and do something significant. And so this is where we really, I got really excited when Todd reached out about sort of resurrecting the OFF Act, at least parts of it, if we want to do that, because this is the type of legislation that really, really will spur the necessary transition of our energy economy on a timeline that is real, that is based in science, that is based in the research, and really move forward in a productive way rather than ways that are just, again, are not based in science and research. I don't know about y'all, but when that last IPCC report came out last year, and the media lost their minds over it, I got so frustrated because there was nothing in it that wasn't in the last IPCC report. That was blocked, by the way, by Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United States, and somebody else, I can't remember who, sorry, there were 4 countries, but we know we have this information. We know it's based in science and research. So I I get really heated about this. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I'm very, very excited to be here with all of you. And just at the notion of getting to hopefully work with all of you to bring this back to life, make it even better, make it even stronger, because we definitely can. No one's perfect, right? We like I said, it was a very rushed process. So we had to, there were probably some things that we didn't lean into as much as we should have and things that got forgotten, but we have some time now to really, really make it amazing and bring it forward into the US and the rest of the world. Sorry, that was really fast.
Rania, I'm so excited because I feel like we had joint custody of a baby, you know, because we weren't talking when we were running with the OFF Act, and you had created it and we ran with it. And as you know, AOC endorsed the OFF Act early, but when she was a candidate, Sunrise Movement was working on the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge, and they got exposed to the OFF Act, and then they all ended up in Pelosi's office. And so the OFF Act was the generation, or the foundation for the political shift into the Green New Deal conversation. Absolutely. And one day we'll have to do a back history dive into how that all played out behind the scenes. But so this was huge, and it put the idea of federal legislation in Congress on the map. And then ever since then, we've been building in that direction, and you all know where we are today. So flagship bills of that magnitude have huge organizing power, and they can catalyze things happening that you can never plan and never fathom. So absolutely. I'm just so excited. We're joining forces. We're ready to do a public round of input on the OFF Act, I think is the next step, right, Rania?
Absolutely.
Next steps? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and we would love, we again, this is meant to be a collaborative effort. Not any one of us has every answer, right? But collectively, I bet we do. So it's absolutely, that's kind of the next step in our minds, and would love anyone who's interested to jump in with us and really make this as strong as it can possibly be.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I think we're at time. Do you need to bounce?
Yeah, I do. I'm so sorry, but thank you all so much. And no doubt we'll be in touch. And Todd has my information. So if anybody would like to reach out and chat some more, anything, I am absolutely here. Thank you all very, very much.
Thanks,
Todd.
Rania. Yay, Rania to the rescue. OFF Act, hallelujah. Well, that's wonderful. Oh, you have no idea when she said yes, how excited that made me. And other people are saying yes to this idea. I'm not sure if it's too soon to talk. Well, at least Food and Water Watch is helping us look at the bill and talking about how to help us get it filed. And they might want to add a few things. So, and EDF has said yes for a bill next year. They're sort of focused on our immediate fights, of course. So there are people saying yes to this idea, and that's a different place that we're in now than we used to be. So it's very exciting. All right, next up, we're going to have Greg give us an update on all the exciting work that's going on inside, the Earth Bill Network and Climate Crisis Policy, and just to update everybody on where we are on things. And before he goes, we all need to always thank Greg. You have no idea, he is the backbone and foundation of so many critical parts of this work. There was just no way it could happen without him. So thank you, Greg, for everything, and please take it away.
Thanks, Todd. I'm also running the meeting. It feels odd to spotlight myself, but I'm doing it anyway. So I'm just going to give you a sense of where we're at with the adopted district effort. And even though we've been a little bit, idle since towards the end of last year, there's still more going on with the adopted district. We have 120 districts covered, and we have, my last count is 383 activists in those districts. We have 94 Democratic districts and 26 Republican districts, and 37 Democratic and 20 Republican senators in those states, and 1 independent. We've got people in 29 states. We just added one recently. I was looking at the list of states that we have folks, and Alabama is the one that we added. So we have a few folks in Alabama now. California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, there's Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, Idaho, Massachusetts, Maryland, Michigan, Montana, Minnesota, North Carolina, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Texas. We actually added a bunch of folks in Texas recently, and Virginia, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin. So that's where we are with the adopted districts. Those are the folks we have.
That's wonderful, Greg. Wow. I didn't hear those numbers, so I'm excited myself. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to talk about the
Sure.
fundraising now, or you want me to do it later? The other thing I'm going to do is we're going to take a little break to talk about fundraising. Something that we really don't talk about that much in meetings, but we do have some expenses. They're very modest, but they are expenses nonetheless. And we had a couple of years of grants that I believe now we won't be getting anymore. So we're looking to fill the hole. And it doesn't take much to keep us afloat. And so I just want to thank everyone who's already regularly contributing and giving us money. Let's see, we don't need much, like I said. We currently get about $200 a month from folks. It's not quite enough to cover our expenses. It would be great if we could figure out a way to fundraise $1,000 a month, $12,000 annually, which is not a lot, but it's what we need. Now, one way to achieve this would be to have folks sign up for giving a regular amount on a monthly basis, as Todd wants to call it, a $10 a month club. We'd need like 100 folks to do that, but of course people could give more. And let's see, this money just provides us with the infrastructure necessary to hold these meetings and to have websites and to keep everything basically running. So if you yourself have some kind of financial slack, or you have the resources, or you know folks that do, please throw some money at us. We could really use it. It's very, very helpful, and it will allow us to keep this effort going forward. I'll put in the chat the donation link, so you could do that now if you want to.
All right. Well, wonderful, Greg. Thank you so much again for everything. And thank you, everybody who supports. So the idea is $10 a month. If you can manage on a regular basis, that would be huge. And that would get us there. And this is our least favorite thing in the world to do, fundraise, as I'm sure that feels, a lot of people feel that way. But that's how it goes. So it's part of the game. All right, with that, I think we're running remarkably on time, and I'm very thrilled about that. But just kudos to everyone who's in the adopted district work. And we're going to be much more engaged with you this year. We're looking for some help in terms of organizers to help coordinate that many people. We're very decentralized and volunteer, as you know, so we really count on everybody initiating things themselves, and that's going extremely well in a lot of places. We have some remarkable teams in a lot of districts, but it would be nice to have more hand-holding for people who need a little bit more and a little follow-up. Obviously, that many states and that many volunteers, it's just impossible. And so we need somebody who loves that kind of thing, staying in touch with people by email, reminding them, checking in with them about where they are in their outreach to the Congress, how they're doing building local teams, and then all the individual steps that they could take, just keeping people motivated and inspired and staying in touch. So if any of you have to have time and energy and like that kind of thing, it would be great to have a core group of people. 4 or 5 of us, I think, could really tackle this. And I would love the help, and I'll be working directly with you all the time, and we will have a lot of fun. All right, next up, we have a couple of wonderful guests, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember who I told would be come in which order. So I think I told Jane that she was going to be next. Is Jane with us?
Jane is with you. Hey, y'all.
Hey, y'all. And I hope that's okay for Shailly. All right, good. So I'm going to introduce Jane. I just met her recently. But we've been involved in the Plastics Works, as you know, as part of our bill package for over a year now. It's one of the original pieces. And so we're all about building power through uniting across causes. So that's one reason we're involved in that. Plus the plastics issue itself is extremely important, of course. But I just recently met Jane and I saw her in 3 contexts. One, she was running a meeting, better than me, man. She keeps it going. It was just brilliant. I was like, yay, somebody after my own heart, how she runs a meeting. And then we had a one-on-one that was really heart-touching, and we had a deep conversation. And then the next day I saw her with the Department of State ruling the room. And so it depends on whether she has her hair down or up. I think she really can, So anyway, I'm just thrilled to meet such expertise, and I welcome you here. She's here to talk about the Plastics Front, the coalition, and the treaty work that's happening. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Todd, for that marvelous introduction. I am honored to be among all of you today and to see how much heft and how much energy there is around the climate legislation. As some of y'all may have heard in our work and messaging over the last couple of years, it has become increasingly clear that on both a global scale, but also domestically in the United States, we are simply not going to meet our climate goals if we do not take into account plastics production and use and waste disposal in those climate goals. And that's where we've really connected on this issue of plastics, not predominantly as a waste issue, but actually as a climate issue, as a health issue, and frankly, as a justice issue. As Todd mentioned earlier, I am joining you today from down here in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where I'm from and actually where I do most of my organizing. But most of my work is on the global front. So I'm with the Center for International Environmental Law. We have been organizing and working in concert with a number of incredible groups over the last about 5 or 10 years to actually bring plastics to prominence on the global policy agenda. And that has come up very quickly, much more quickly than any of us anticipated when we first got into this conversation. And as you also may have heard, where we are right now is that next month at the United Nations Environment Assembly meeting, which will happen both in person in Nairobi, where the UN Environment Program is based, and virtually in a hybrid format that is as yet to be determined how effectively that runs. The UN Environment Assembly is going to be discussing the terms of negotiation for a new treaty on plastics. For a long time, that global policy conversation on plastics has been focused on plastics as a waste issue. And in some cases, there are a number of countries, including the United States, that are still talking about plastics predominantly as a waste issue, and not just as a waste issue, but as an ocean waste issue, which is a particular sliver of the plastics problem. The global agenda around plastics has now really expanded. There is much more research and understanding of both the climate impacts of plastics and frankly, the toxicity impacts of plastics, including plastics that are being recycled, which is most commonly the solution put forward for even the problems of plastics in the environment. So next month at the UN Environment Assembly, countries are going to be deciding how to negotiate a treaty. And then over the next 18 to 24 months, so roughly over the next 2 years, we're going to be actually negotiating that treaty. There is a lot of space and work for the United States to participate in that. And we hope that they will participate in that conversation well, which is not always a given. So the reason why Todd and I connected and why we had that meeting with the State Department last week was to actually show organization, a collection of organizations all united under the banner of Break Free from Plastic movement and other climate and environmental movements that draw us together, justice movements, to say, United States, you have to think about this problem much larger than just plastics in the ocean. This has to be seen as a climate problem. This has to be seen as a health problem, and it has to be seen as an environmental justice problem. We are very excited to have such an incredible amount of support from folks on how the United States participates in those global negotiations. And I think there is actually a space for us to have a conversation about how some context on the global plastics negotiations could actually have a role in the domestic policy agenda at Congress, at the congressional level that we are talking about. And I'll just close out by saying, if you are interested in participating more in this or attending some of those State Department meetings there, they're not what I would call fun, but they're interesting. You are more than welcome to email me, and I will drop my email in the chat, especially if you are part of a local organization. I am also a director of a group called No Waste Louisiana, and I sit on the Greater New Orleans Interfaith Climate Change Coalition. And both of these local organizations are also mobilizing around climate change and around ending the injustice down here from plastics production. So I am very excited to be part of this conversation and part of this group, honored to be invited to present, and very excited for what we might be able to do together. And with that, I think, Todd, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, Jane, thank you so much. You're so many wonderful activists in this movement. It's unbelievable, and leaders. Jane, could you just also touch just a little bit on what you said about the passion in the Republican areas that are not really as Republican as they think for climate advocacy, and what you feel about the mojo down south for us to tackle this through the Republican opposition?
Yeah, so I think that we have a lot of space to actually be able to organize people around the health issue, and to be able to organize people in Louisiana, in Texas, in Mississippi, around the facets of both justice and righting injustice, and also on the issues of health. This has been really effective for us to say, look, this is not about one agenda or another, one party or another. This is about the fact that our babies deserve a future. And the way that we've been talking about it, and I find that this works, is, I have a little boy who's 5, and I used to worry that by the time he was my age, he wouldn't be able to visit my home because it would be inundated by sea level rise and air pollution from surrounding chemical plants. That fear is out of date on some level, because actually I'm now concerned that he won't finish high school before we are going to have to leave this area. And I'm sorry that works me up to think about that. My dad still lives in the house I went home to the hospital to. So to think about my child not being able to come back and us not being able to make this a permanent home is really sad for me. And I think being able to connect with folks on the level that it's not a partisan issue, it's about our literal survival and our literal safety, and the fact that our children, Todd, you said something a minute ago about how our children won't have the freedom to make the same decisions that we have the freedom to make right now. And I think that really talking to folks about the fact that if we are 5th and 6th generation Louisiana, like I am, and like many of the people in Louisiana are, then we need to be investing in making sure that this state will survive and making sure that its people will survive. And organizing on that front, I think, has actually been very effective. And, we have otherwise conservative legislators who are willing to actually say, oh, we're losing a football field of land an hour. Like this can't be okay. As I'm joining you today, there is a chemical plant on fire in Lake Charles in Southwest Louisiana that when it exploded, there was a mushroom cloud, and it is dumping ethylene dichloride into the atmosphere. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, but the inhalation of ethylene dichloride causes long-term kidney damage, severe neurological damage if you are exposed to it in large amounts for a long amount of time. And that fire is just burning. And being able to actually have a conversation about the fact that is a climate emergency, it is a health emergency, and it crosses both political, literal state and country boundaries, but also the political divides that typically rent people apart. And I think that has been an effective strategy at this point. And as much as I'm like, a chemical plant is on fire and that is an effective organizing strategy, I hate that I have just said that out loud, and yet that is the condition in which we live, and we deserve better.
So now you hear how deep the passion runs, and how emotional this is for everyone, particularly people living, anyway, everyone. So that's what gives me hope, is that passion is underlying brilliant organizing. So I'm starting to see the pieces of hope. All right, Jane. Well, so we're going to be working in the South. That's where we're going. We're going into the Republican districts. We're going to go through the middle. And that's where the victory is going to end up being, because there's no really other way around it, right? So, well, wonderful, Jane. Any last thoughts before you go?
The only thing I want to plug before I go is that I am also a Louisiana state lead for a group called the Gulf South for a Green New Deal. This is a 5-state formation plus Puerto Rico that is actually a very robust coalition of more than 200 organizations that is organizing for state level policies that bring in a Green New Deal, a real economic revitalization around renewable energy, around justice, around community uplift, and also the protection of democracy, which is a key part of this. And if anybody is in the South, if you're in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, or Puerto Rico, and you're not part of Gulf South for a Green New Deal, I will also drop my email in the chat, and we would love for you to join us. So that's my last plug. And thank you all for doing this work.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're excited to talk to that group too about the federal focus. You mentioned that they might be open to looking at federal legislation as well as part of their. So that'll be fabulous. Great. And we'll get our folks from our adopted district. We should just give you all their contacts and cross-fertilize so everybody's part of both efforts. All right. Wonderful, Jane. Thank you so much. And look at us, right on time. I was so stressed about the time today. Next, we're going to get to welcome Shailly Barnes. Yay. Hi. Good to see you again.
Yes, same here.
From the Poor People's Campaign. And so I know you've been working on voters' rights, and I know you have this excited, bigger vision for our communities coming together in June. And I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much for being here. Welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Todd. It's always great to see this network again and who you've pulled together around these pressing issues. So the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a national campaign that is organized in more than 40 states across the country. I'm the policy director, and we have what we address are the interlocking injustices, as Jane was just saying, of climate crisis, poverty, systemic racism, and militarism and the war economy, all of which are upheld by these narratives that basically say poverty is the fault of the poor. This is the best we can do, and you're asking for too much if you think that we can change any of this. So we confront all of that by organizing across these states, bringing people together around our common needs, just to be able to thrive and not just survive in the land of plenty. So last year we did a big push around voting rights, but also around living wages, the Build Back Better agenda, and for many of us who are part of that push, it would seem, these past few weeks, are a disappointment. Critical legislation has been blocked or defeated by a couple of Democrats and a block of Republicans that just won't be moved. Legislation that would benefit people in every single one of their, would benefit their own constituents. And whatever we may get later on this year may not have a child tax credit. It may not have paid leave. There's no discussion of living wages anymore. And we're still in a pandemic. Without really any meaningful expansion of healthcare in terms of being able to access just a right to health. And so from the perspective of the Poor People's Campaign, I just wanted to share three points. The first is that none of this, whether it's the attack on voting rights, the attack on immigrants, the attack on poor people and low-wage workers, or the attacks on the climate, none of this started in 2021. None of it even started in 2020, or even with the Trump administration. But all of those things, what was facilitated through Trump and what the pandemic revealed made things worse. But what we are facing today is a culmination of years, if not decades, of policies and structures and systems that brought us to this point. In 2018, the Poor People's Campaign did a report called The Souls of Poor Folk that looked at the trends on these injustices and dated back to 1968, from the 1968 campaign. And we can see that in just about every dimension, again, poverty, systemic racism, militarism, climate, what we are seeing today traces back through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. And these harms have been, escalated recently, but their roots run deep and across political party. This isn't to take any blame off of specific political leaders or elected officials, but just to put our current moment in that broader context. Two, none of this is happening because we can't afford to do the things we need to do, right? The pandemic made very clear that our priorities are the wealthy and our priorities are war. The wealthy made $2 trillion over the pandemic, money that they can hold on to, whereas poor people, especially poor people of color, got temporary programs that were all taken away. And then we passed a military budget that is 4 times as much as a moral budget, right? And so the money exists. It's the political will we don't have. That's a second point. And 3, the way to summon that political will isn't always a straight line. I think back to some of the history of the Civil Rights Movement or the Voting Rights Act. When that was passed, it wasn't in an election year, right? It was 1965. There were years of organizing, mobilizing, bills, violence, victories, and losses that led up to that point. And then after it was passed, there was a breakthrough. And the breakthrough revealed the limitations of the win of the Voting Rights Act. Reverend Martin Luther King, after that was passed, said that it didn't matter if you could sit at a lunch counter if you couldn't afford anything on the menu, meaning voting rights without economic rights are not substantive rights. And he began to organize with other leaders of the poor and clergy and people of faith and conscience a poor people's campaign to bring these different injustices together and to push further and beyond that win. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we need to keep these issues together and everything that we do, to keep the infrastructures, as Reverend Barber says, of our climate, of our roads, of our daily lives, and of our democracy together, to keep bringing our movements together to project the power that we all have as a united front against the forces of injustice. And so what King said was the power of a movement can make the power structures of this country say yes when they have been saying no for a very, very long time. And this is what the Poor People's Campaign is doing in the months ahead. We're organizing a mass Poor People's and Low Wage Workers Assembly and march on Washington in June. And it will also be a march to the polls. This is June 18th. And it's the beginning. June 18th will be the beginning of what we can do together. If we can actually project the strength of the climate movement, the strength of movements against systemic racism and movements against poverty and movement against militarism and war. And if we can say that this is who we are, this is who we have to confront today. This is I think we will be able to break through a lot of the barriers that have been put in our way and begin to see gains that none of us may have thought were possible. So we invite this whole network to be a part of that mobilization, to bring what you can, who you can, to reach out to your own networks. And this isn't just for the campaign, it's for everything that all of us need, everything that we've been fighting for. And that, again, the Poor People's Campaign is organized across 40 states with many networks like this one, faith denominations, cultural organizers, and we invite all of that and all of you to come, to throw down with us, throw down with us in June, again, as the beginning of what we can do together.
Thank you so much, Shailly. That is so profoundly true and critical, and it's really the path forward, unity and movement building. There's really no other option at this point. I mean, this is our survival together, coming together for our own survival. And just one note on this, the corporate forces are what keep everybody poor, right? Ultimately, corporations, corporates, and rich people controlling the policy. The climate movement presents this unusual opportunity to forge through that. Big oil, big ag. Obviously the climate issue impacts everyone and then intersects with almost every cause and topic. So if we can use the climate vehicle to forge enough power to push through and defeat big ag and big oil, then we open up the situation. It'll be a different ballgame in Congress. The people will be deciding the policy. So this is why it's so important for us to all converge. And this is the showdown that's being queued up. And it's not going to go away. We're going to have to fight through it, and we're going to have to go through that together. So I'm just very excited about us being in touch and collaborating and talking about how to fit climate into all of that. And I just think it's wonderful. Is there any other thing else you would like to share with everyone? We'll figure out how to keep you informed. Of course, we always do about whatever Poor People's is doing. We'll share it through all our networks. and you'll have links and everything else to plug in. But is there anything else about perhaps how local groups can connect to local organizers and start to form relationships there?
Yeah, so we have these coordinating committees across 40 states in the country. And if you, on our website, poorpeoplescampaign.org, there's a way to contact directly that organizing, that coordinating committee and its members. And if you reach out and it's hard to connect with somebody because people are, we're going to be doing text banking and phone banking and all kinds of stuff in the next several weeks, training volunteers, reaching out to all of our lists. And so, if at any time you run into a block, also feel free to contact me, Shailly at poorpeoplescampaign.org, and I'll be happy to connect you with the right people.
Wonderful, great. All right, guys, you hear the message. We got to tie knots, can build relationships at the local level, because that's where all the power resides. And then we're going to go after those votes in Congress one by one together. All right, Shailly, well, thank you again so much. It's wonderful and to coordinate with this, and we're excited about June, and we'll stay in touch about it all.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, next up, we have, really it's the main event. I hope Felice and Courtney are here. Are they, Craig?
Felice is not here, but we have Courtney, I believe.
Oh, yay.
No, we don't. Sorry.
Oh. Well, that's
I don't have either of them.
unusual. Because they were both, let's see, I know they're both in back-to-back things. Courtney.
Yeah, Felice is usually prompt.
All right, so I'll start on, I'm going to just send Felice an email while we're on, live online, and Courtney joining us. And I'll start real briefly then, though. So I'm a little surprised by that, obviously, because Felice is always here with us. So as you know, the Build Back Better push is still on. And there are $550 billion worth of investments. Oh, here we have Felice, yay.
Yeah.
To the rescue. Yay, Felice, you're just in time. So there are $550 billion worth of investments in a variety of remarkable projects and initiatives and seed funding for all sorts of important things. So this is a really serious opportunity here for a big win. And Felice, welcome. I was just doing the intro for you. And so we're going all in. And you saw in the last email that went out, there's a whole list of materials and things. But I'm going to turn it over to Felice to give you the full court press on what's going on from now until, I guess, March to the State of the Union. Welcome, Felice, and have at it.
Hi, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. Thanks for inviting me back, Todd. It's been a while since I've had a chance to visit with all of you. So Todd and I spoke earlier this week and wanted to share a little bit about where things are with the Build Back Better Act and the administration's commitment to moving the Build Back Better agenda. And then talk a little bit about where some opportunities are for individuals to engage, whether as volunteers or as members of a particular community group, or if you are representing a coalition or a network. I would say that we are really at a crucial moment. We had a really incredible victory last year when the House of Representatives passed the Build Back Better Act. This was a tremendous lift, and thanks to all of you who were part of that effort, all of the work that we did with that really paid off. The votes that we secured on the House side were not easy. I don't want us to think that that was a slam dunk. We worked really hard as a community, and we worked with a lot of organizations across interest groups, whether it's organizations that were really focused on on childcare issues, the Care Can't Wait Coalition, whether it was the organization working on fixing some of the chronic problems associated with prescription drugs and elder care, and whether it's the organizations that have been working on climate change and clean energy. So as a coalition, we really worked very collaboratively, hand in glove, to get the House of Representatives to move this bill and move it over to the Senate. And then things were looking pretty good. And then we had sort of our late December unfortunate moment where Senator Manchin said, you know, enough. I'm walking away from this, and really threw a bucket of ice water on the entire effort. And I'll be honest, I think it was a very, very low moment. It was right before the holidays. I think people were really kind of feeling really energized and excited about the momentum that we had. And then we all went into our respective corners and just kind of went quiet. And it seemed to kind of it was a dark period. I'm not gonna lie. As a climate advocate, and as advocates that were working on the Build Back Better agenda, it was a really tough period. But coming out of that, we kind of brushed ourselves off, and we recommitted to making sure that the Build Back Better agenda continues to move ahead. We know that if those who are advocating for change go quiet, then change doesn't happen. And so we were at this sort of really kind of critical juncture of, we can't afford to go quiet. That yes, there's some hurt feelings, and people had, you know, what we could maybe say some tantrums, a lot of egos involved, people feeling like they weren't getting listened to, everything that was unfolding between a senator and the White House. All of us could probably, you know, picture the same kind of fallouts in our respective families or in our workplaces. So, you know, tempers had to kind of settle down a little bit, but as advocates, we knew we needed to kind of brush ourselves off and recommit to getting the Build Back Better agenda over the finish line. And so one colleague said, this is not blind optimism, this is determination. And there is a difference, right? If you're too optimistic, or you think like, oh yeah, we're confident this is going to happen, then we might lose a bit of fire in our belly. And we actually need that fire in our belly to move this thing forward. And so I'm here to bring my fire in my belly, and hope to leave some with you for this push ahead. I will say that it's only through building momentum and for lawmakers to get reminded and feel and know that there's urgency and that their constituents are expecting this to get over the finish line, will we be successful in dislodging this? Right now, conversations are actively underway. The CEOs of major companies are meeting with the president right now as we speak, talking about components that are in the Build Back Better agenda. You will see some of the articles that will appear later this afternoon, but they are meeting with the president right now. You've got key senators that are talking amongst one another on how to figure out how to identify the components that are in the Build Back Better agenda that can garner 50 votes, which means not everything that was in the House bill will be in the Senate bill, but the things that we know have a lot of support, there's a commitment to bundling those together and to move those through as expeditiously as possible. For those of us who've been working on climate change and climate action and clean energy, the things that are in the House bill, those continue to be very, very popular, and there is a commitment to continue to move those along. And our job as advocates is to remind lawmakers that as negotiations continue, many of which will happen behind closed doors, which at this point actually is probably good, right? Let's, you know, if anything's too much in the public, it might not actually be beneficial. These are going to be really some tough negotiations. But what we want to make sure is that as those negotiations move along, that the investments in clean energy and climate change stay top of mind, and that lawmakers are reminded that this is a critical moment, and we cannot let this opportunity slip through our hands. In terms of time frame, so the conversations are underway, as I mentioned. The president is really leaning in. His chief of staff is really leaning in. His advisors are leaning in, and a few key senators are really leaning in and working to dislodge this. The way that the community, the coalition advocates are organizing ourselves is really doing kind of a sprint. I would say we're now at a 6-week sprint between now and March 1. Why March 1? That's the date of the State of the Union address. We don't anticipate it's going to be like a modern miracle if the bill gets actually through all of the procedural twists and turns that need to happen to have the bill done by March 1. But March 1 is at least kind of one goalpost that we're aiming for our kind of momentum building and what we're calling kind of our surge period. So we have a 6-week push that we're embarking on. A lot is happening this week and moving into next week. Next week is a national week of action that the Building Back Together Coalition is organizing. Why next week? It's because the Senate is coming back from recess. They're home this week. That's why you'll see that many of your senators are holding town hall meetings. Senator Wyden, if anyone is from Oregon, Senator Wyden has been meeting with his constituents, and many other people are also meeting with their constituents. So what we're asking individuals to do in this moment is a few things. One is, if you haven't reached out to your senator recently, this is a great opportunity to do so. And the message will be two things really. One is reminding them of the importance of the climate and clean energy components in the Build Back Better agenda, and to urge them to continue to prioritize those provisions as the Build Back Better Act continues to get discussed and negotiated in the Senate. So that's number one, remind them and urge them to keep this top of mind. And the second request, and when I'll follow up with a specific toolkit, I'll give it to Todd to circulate around. The second one is also equally important, which is ask your senator if they would be willing to be public in calling and demonstrating their support for Build Back Better, and to use their platform however they can to get that message out. That could include, doing mail to their constituents. That could include using their social media accounts. Almost every senator has Facebook, has Twitter. Ask them to be public, to urge, we want like more noise and activity, and reinforce their particular commitment to this agenda and to getting this done. And then a third one is some lawmakers are excited to write an opinion piece in their local newspaper, and to be, again, more public facing and saying, look, I'm committed to the Build Back Better agenda. This is good for my community. This is good for my state. And I am committed to getting this over the finish line so that our state and our communities can benefit from that. And so that's another part of like a way for a senator to be public. As an example, my senator is Senator Chris Van Hollen. I live in Maryland, and yay, somebody else from Maryland. And when I get his emails and his constituent newsletters, and he says, here are my top priorities for 2022, Build Back Better, getting the Build Back Better agenda completed and implemented is on his list. And I know that he is spending time and paying a lot of attention to getting this dislodged with his members, his colleagues on Capitol Hill. And we need every lawmaker on Capitol Hill has a role to play in getting this dislodged. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll open it up for questions, is that we don't want to ignore our House members, the House of Representatives, many members of Congress. I told many of you who've been part of these calls every month that we can't take any of them for granted. And we need to thank them along the way for the things that they've done. Many of them are going to be facing a very, very, very tough race in November. And if they're not facing a tough race, they're already getting really hammered by the opposition for the votes that they have taken. So members of Congress are having town hall meetings. Some are virtual, some are in person. However, they're being hosted. If you have an opportunity to join those town halls and thank them for their leadership and remind them of the importance of the Build Back Better agenda, they will appreciate it. Every member of Congress that we have heard from in the last week has told us calls into our offices make a difference. Keep the calls coming. We need to hear from the grassroots. Please come visit us if we can. Don't forget to thank us, because we do spend a lot of time and attention of getting these things over the finish line, and we don't want to just hear your complaints. We actually also want to be thanked. And again, reminding them that they have a lot of support at home to get Build Back Better over the finish line. So with that, I want to sort of open it up. I know that there's a lot in the chat that I have not been reading since I've been speaking, but maybe I could just open it up and I'll see if there's a question or two that I can answer for the group.
Well, thank you so much, Felice. And while you're doing that, I'll screen share some of the tools and tools kits. I've been posting them in the chat. I know everyone's a little bit tired, but this is what movement and work is all about. You got to pick yourself up and brush yourself out and get back in it again. And that's where we are. So hopefully people can muster up another push. I think the ask, you've asked a lot of things. You've been in touch with them about the bill package and about all of this year. The new ask is, can you say something? So you really want to just a simple email to them, very short. Would you please make sure to send out a constituent newsletter or do a public announcement of some kind of support for the BBA? That's what our new ask is on the table, to create this groundswell. You have to do, you got the hoopla, we got to get the hoopla going and get people excited about this again. So that's our challenge and that's our work, but you can do. So look at all these cute things. One of the part of the Coalition Climate Action Campaign has put all this together. So it's very simple. Text messages and all sorts of memes, download and share, very cute things. So feel free to access that. There's this great report here, easy for me to say, real world, never mind. A lot of great benefits that are real in the world from this proposal. And I was reading it again and it got me excited again. So take a read of this. You have in your materials, I put it in the chat. All this clean transportation, clean water, clean electricity, community resilience, land protection, healthy buildings, clean manufacturing, regenerative agriculture. So these are all the building blocks for the transition, so these are very important. And it just it's critical that we get these passed. So did you want to ask, the last piece I want to share with you is the talking points, or the toolkit really. Here it is. And it's got all that again. It's got a lot of specific elected officials that were easy to tweet them directly from this list. So it's all here if you need any of those materials.
Let me just, thank you, Todd. I just wanted to, if it's okay, there's a few questions in here that I could maybe answer.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a question about what climate provisions are still in the Build Back Better Act. So everything that was in the House bill is still intact. There's nothing that anybody has, and again, the Senate has not yet put pen to paper, but our sense is that everything that's in there has really garnered a lot of support. Is it enough? No, it's not going to be enough, but it is so critical to get these locked in, because what they do is they are further incentivizing investments in clean energy, manufacturing, energy efficiency, all the things that we need to really move the private sector, move the market faster than it otherwise would just through regulations. The regulations alone will not get us the reductions that we need, to get these. It's really, it's a bill that signals where money should go, right? This is not setting any emission standard. It's about where to incentivize further manufacturing. So expanding battery manufacturing, expanding the definition of, what would constitute of like renewable energy or investment tax credits. In the past, it was only for wind and solar, but expanding that. So offshore wind could benefit from that. Battery manufacturers could benefit from some of those tax incentives. So the entire tax incentives package is incredibly important. And that's the one that really has the lion's share of the investments. I'm happy to send more details if folks are interested in that. In terms of, I think the other thing I just want to share, because there's some questions about false solutions and big ag, and what's the role of large agricultural industries. There are many sectors of the economy that have to do a tremendous amount to address the climate crisis, and everybody has a role to play. And there are pockets of activity and pockets of progress happening across all industries, but no industry, from where I sit, is a monolithic entity. And so what we're working really hard to do is make sure that we're investing in where there's progress and where there's opportunities for change. So whether that's in the agricultural sector, whether that's with, whether that's in some of the carbon storage sector, the reality is all of us depend on aspects of our daily lives that run on fossil fuels. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that as much as possible, we're making investments to facilitate a shift to 100% clean economy by 2050.
Wonderful. So as everybody, it's easy to get bogged down in the details, but we're past details really at this moment of the political move that's in play. So it's time to just push something over the finish line. Really, we need a win. We need it for a variety of reasons. And everybody, I hope you understand and agree with that. But what can you do? So if everyone could just make a commitment to doing one thing, that would be wonderful. And the link to the chat. So, all right. So any other questions? Anyone want to come on and ask a question, or put your questions in the chat is fine.
Rachel.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. I'm interested in the money for regenerative agriculture. For example, it says money set aside so farmers can buy machinery that has less carbon, when you use it. If it's earmarked like this, does that mean that the Secretary of Agriculture can't take it and put it to another purpose? It has to be purposed for exactly what the bill says. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's a really great question. And we're already seeing how important it is to be involved in making sure that the money is going to precisely those things. So you're absolutely right. It earmarks the money. So it directs the federal agency to say, this money has to be used for this purpose. And remember last year, the bipartisan infrastructure package, there was a massive amount of money that's almost doing a down payment of like rebuilding our roads and bridges,
Yeah, sure.
and replacing our lead service lines and getting more transit. Even in those cases, it's already being earmarked. It needs to be used for this purpose, and there's no wiggle room. And some offices are, basically setting up some watchdogs to make sure, it doesn't stray. But that's a really great question, Rachel. And I would say, for rural, the bill has to work for everybody, right? It can't just work for people who live in an urban area. We have a lot of senators who represent rural states. I lived in 3 rural states. I've lived in Maine, I've lived in Montana, and I've lived in Kansas. The bill has to work for rural states, and it's got to work for urban areas. And some of the things, we might not love everything in the bill, but recognize it's got to work for everybody. And so most important is getting those down payments.
Great. All right. So good. I think we're good on this front. Do you all feel it? We're back in it. We're not giving up, right? We can't give up. Because this is just the beginning, obviously, but we're in a good position. Things, we're confronting the opposition. We're right up against the gates, is where things are. So it's not a fun place to be, but it's an exciting place to be. And it's the beginning of a showdown that's not going anywhere but our direction. Ultimately, we are going to win. We're going to prevail. And we might have setbacks along the way. We always will. But that we're going to keep going. And activism about determination. I agree with that. I think an activist recently said, I'm not optimistic, I'm not pessimistic, I'm determined. And I've sort of reached that new place myself. So that's great. All right, Felice, well, we appreciate it. The Climate Action Campaign is hard at work. You know how to get to them, their websites. There's all sorts of actions going on. She didn't really mention there are actions all over the country that are planned, everywhere from, and there's something with Markey this afternoon at 6 o'clock. Felice, do you have the link for that? There's a
I can let me, if you just give me 1 second.
I'll stall while you look for it.
Okay, thank you.
And then after we say goodbye to Felice, we're going to hang on the line for a minute, and anyone who wants, we'll just chat and talk about where things are, anything that's top of mind for you. Okay. And so there's a couple, profile events. There's one with Markey today at 6 o'clock, I think. So it's like a pep rally. Hopefully we'll find the link.
I am. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. And there's others. Representative Jayapal is having a rally. I forget the link for that. Oh, look at that. Police came up with that link. Oh, yay. So there it is in the chat. Be good to chime in at 6 o'clock. These events are designed to reinvigorate us and to get us excited and motivated again. So I don't know about you, but I can always use that kind of support. Oh, go ahead, Felice.
Yeah. One last thing I'll share, and I'm going to just share this as a colleague, because it reminds me of a comment that's further up here, which is that the hardest part as advocates is meeting our members where they are. And we might not love everything about what that lawmaker advocates for, stands for. And obviously, if they're like with the Republican Party and we know that they're not going to support the Build Back Better Act, I wouldn't focus your energies elsewhere. But even for the Republicans, if there's something in the future where there is bipartisan support, it's just important to meet a member where they are. We might not love everything about what they advocate for. And I will also share, somebody wrote about being somebody who's pro-military. I'm a mom of a son who's in the military, and I am personally indebted to his service every single day. And so we might not all love the military, but just know that there are tens of thousands of individuals who devote their time and service taking care of our country and protecting our liberties and protecting the liberties of those around the world. So I want to thank everybody who is in the military, and just remember, let's meet our members where they are. And with that, I just want to thank you all for your continued commitment to climate action.
Thank you, Felice. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. You can feel a sense of community, and that's really wonderful. It's really coalescing, and we're in this together. And I'll work in Republican districts. That's going to be where this ultimately concludes, and building those relationships and letting them know now It's never too soon. One day they will be ready to come on board because it's just going to be an inevitable direction that everyone's going to have to get on board with. So you never know when that moment will happen, and it won't happen until we start asking. So we should start asking now everywhere. With that, I'll conclude the official portion of our meeting today, and with great thanks for everyone for putting up with me last year. And as you might be able to tell, I'm in a new position emotionally, and I'm ready to dig in and forge ahead. And I have great hope that in the next coming years, we will be uniting around something that's an unstoppable force, and we will stop this pollution together. So thank you again for everything, everybody. And with that, we'll conclude, Andrew, the recording, and I'll just hang on here and see if anyone has anything you want to talk about.